In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make my alternate block, Love is the Best Medicine, for the Riley Blake Strength in Every Stitch Quilt Along. This is using my fabric called Sunny from the Hush Hush 5 collection and some of the beautiful confetti cottons that go along with it. In addition to being a quilt block tutorial, I'm going to give you some basic tips for quilting success. So if you are brand new to quilting, you're going to find that in here too. So my name is Tara Reed. I have been a fabric designer with Riley Blake since 2019, and I'm excited to share this block with you today. The first tip for success for quilt blocks is starch, or starch and sizing alternative. This is readily available. I grabbed it at Walmart. It is just a basic starch. It is made out of a vegetable product, potatoes, I believe. So especially if you live in the South or even other places, if you don't wash your block or whatever you put it into soon, it could attract bugs. One thing to know about this. This is another very readily available one. It comes in lots of different scents. I usually use lavender. It's the easiest to find. Starching and making your fabric nice and stiff is really important because you're going to get more accurate cuts and everything's going to stay together better when you sew. Now, this is one of my little things that I do when I starch because this fabric is stapled onto my ironing board and I just don't want it to get gross and full of starch. So I have what I like to call starch fabric. It's just a wide piece of fabric doubled over that I lay on top when I'm going to starch, because that way any starch that isn't on what I'm starching goes here. When it gets too crunchy and stiff, I throw it in the wash and then I come back. First, we're going to starch this piece. Now, when you're starching, you also want to use no steam because the goal is you're going to add starch, which is wet, and then you want to dry it so that it soaks in and stays within the threads of the fabric to make it stiffer. First, we're going to start with the faultless. You always want to shake it and you want to spray generously. This is something that you do with wild abandon. So you can see how it's wet. So let that soak in for a few seconds. And then you're just going to press until it dries. So this is a great thing to do while you're watching TV, listening to a podcast, listening to music. I don't know, what do you like to do when you are waiting for starch to dry? It's like waiting for water to boil. Looks dry. So let's see how that is. That's the side we starched. That's the unstarched. So you can see the difference. Now let's do this other half with Mary Ellen's Best Press. And so now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to be really patient and put the heat across this until that dries. Another important point about starching is you want to starch your fabric before you cut it, because sometimes it will cause the fabric to shrink a little bit, and you do not want to change the sizes of your pieces for a quilt block after you have already cut them to be perfect. Precision is everything when it comes to quilt blocks. Now, I'm not going to make you watch me do that, but I'm going to do it for the rest of the colors that we need for this block. Now, when you look at this free pattern, you'll see there are a lot of pieces, A through S, to make this cute little Love is the Best Medicine block. So you want to have a way to label your pieces as you cut them so you're not going back wondering, okay, is this piece D that's 2 by 2 1/4, or is this piece C, B that's 2 1/4 by 2 1/2? You don't have to keep measuring. So what I do is I have fabric clips that have the letters on stickers, A through Z. I keep them in a separate container so I don't lose them and they don't get mixed up. And before I start cutting, I put them in order. I will link to a video tutorial that I did of different ways to do this. You can use paper, Post-its, pins, all kinds of things. I'm also going to be using this, which is a design board. I believe Lori Holt was the pioneer on these. And it is foam core with some scraps of batting on top, fabric around the edge so that it's cute. And it's a great way to keep your blocks organized and also put them in order as you're sewing together. So I will link to that video as well. Next, we need to cut our fabric. First thing I'm going to do is turn this cutting mat over because it's kind of hard to see the white on the white. And one thing I love about this cutting mat is that it is white on one side, so it's great when you're cutting colors or darker fabrics, and it's black on the other side, which makes cutting white and light fabrics so much easier. Look at that contrast. So now let's get back to our pieces. So these directions give you the size pieces that you need to do a 6 by 6 finished block or a 12 by 12 finished block. I'm going to do the tiny one. I think it'll be really cute. Now I have all my pieces cut and labeled with the clips. Now I will say, if you're new to quilting, do not do this tiny size. Don't do the 6-inch because this is a lot of really small pieces. I would practice with the larger quilt block and do the 12.5 by 12.5. So now I'm going to put the clips that I don't need back in my container because I do not want to lose them. And then as I'm using them, I'm going to put them in here as well. So then you're just going to follow the directions that are free from Riley Blake. And even if you're not doing it, I'm going to walk you through a couple techniques for quilting. Another detail that can help your quilting and your quilt blocks be as good as they can be is which thread you use and the thread weight in particular. Now this is a 30 weight thread and this is a 60, and you can see the 30 is a bit thicker than the 60. So the thinner the thread, the less it's going to impact your quilt block. So especially because I'm doing this 6.5 inch with so many teeny tiny pieces, I'm definitely going to be using my thinner thread. Just remember, the bigger the number, the thinner the thread. It's like the opposite of your weight on a scale. That's how I remember it. The first is called a stitch and flip, or some people call it a snowball. And that is how we are going to be making the heart on this block. So it tells me to grab the G, K, N, and O pieces. And I need to draw a line diagonally on each of these squares. And then I do want to, there's 2 of these. I want to keep them together. The solids, it doesn't matter which side. These we want to make sure we're drawing on the back. So I'm just going to use a pencil because this is nice and light. And the one thing that I do is I don't put the ruler right at that point because we want the line right at that point. So I put the ruler a scooch to the side so that when I run my pencil, it's going to be right from the point to the point. So I'm going to do that on all of these blocks, and then I'm going to put the clips back on so that these pieces remain labeled. And this line just needs to be dark enough that you can see it when you're sewing, because we're going to be sewing right on the line. Got those drawn, put that back on there. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make one side of the heart and then the other side of the heart. So the heart is made with the A rectangles. And then on this side, we're going to be using these O squares to create the top part. And this is where it's called the stitch and flip. So we're going to be putting this down. We're going to stitch on that line. We're going to trim a 1/4 inch off here, and we're going to flip this up. So we're replacing that top corner of the rectangle with this color. And that's why it's called stitch and flip, because it's exactly what you do. So these are going to go there. The K are going to go at the top of this one. I'm going to clip that together. And then the G is going to go on the bottom of this one. And the N is going to go on the bottom of this one. And you just need to pay attention to the orientation so that you end up with a heart and not 2 sides of a heart, 2 of the same sides of a heart. So it shows you as you go. So let's go to the sewing machine and we'll sew those 2 pieces together. You also want to make sure you have the proper needle on your sewing machine. I always change my needle before a new quilt block because that is just going to be giving you the best chance of having really nice seams. And I'm going to be using quilting machine needles. These are 90 by 14 from Classe. I don't know if that's how you say it, but that's how I'm going to say it today. I'm just going to put this brand new sharp needle. It's a bit sharper and skinnier on the bottom than the last needle was. And then I'm going to put this skinny little thread in there, and we are going to get started. Now, for most quilt blocks, you want to sew what is called a scant 1/4 inch seam. It is basically 1 thread difference from a 1/4 inch seam. And I will link to a video that shows you exactly what that means and how to achieve that and how to test and all that good stuff, so that this video doesn't get too long. I'm also, whenever I'm doing quilt blocks, I also turn my stitch length to be a bit shorter. And because these blocks are so small, I'm going to use a 1.7 stitch length instead of a standard 2.4, because we just need those stitches to really hold everything in place nicely. I'm also going to use a leader fabric. This is just a scrap that I didn't need for the quilt block. And that basically means I'm just going to start sewing on this piece and then move on to my quilt blocks just to make sure there's no knot on my itty bitty pieces. So I'm going to be looking at my chart and we're going to be starting with this top heart section. So we're going to start by sewing these O squares into the top corner. So I'm going to sew one and then we're going to trim and flip it. And then I'm going to sew the other because they do overlap. And for that, I need to make sure that I am going to sew right on top of that line. Now, because I know we're going to be doing the other side as well, I'm going to grab my K squares and check the orientation, and I'm going to start those as well. And the best way to make sure these are going to go straight is to put your pieces parallel to each other. So instead of trying to go like this where that has to overlap, if you start from this side, it's going to be more precise and easier for you. Now, because we're using so many small pieces and we're going to have to regularly cut and press and sew and cut and press and sew, I brought a mini cutting mat over to my ironing board and a small ruler. This is a trim it ruler that is where the blue is exactly 1/4 inch. So what we're going to do is we're going to line up the inside of the blue right on that stitch line and then trim that, and we know we have it trimmed perfectly. I love that it's the exact measurement that you have to trim a lot. And then because, again, such small pieces, I like to use a mini press. I use this Cricut Easy Press Mini because I have it from Crafting. You can also get other brands that are small like this, but it just makes it easier to see what is going on and to press instead of using something huge like this. That's going to kick off a lot more steam and it's going to be a lot harder to see what you're doing. And then the other tool that is going to help make your blocks really good is your quilter's clapper. This is an unfinished piece of hardwood. It will help absorb the heat and get everything as flat as possible. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set that seam, which means we're going to put heat on top of it before we ever flip it and then press it. That makes sure everything is flat, nothing's wavy, there's no air in the stitching, etc. Then we're going to push that forward and press again and use the quilter's clapper again. So now you can see that this white has replaced that upper corner of this pink color. Now we're going to do this, replace this corner, and then replace this corner, and it will be the left side of our heart. So you want to make sure you push that flat before you start sewing. And I'm just going to be daisy chaining these, so I'm going to jump back and forth between trimming edges, pressing, and sewing to get this done. Always referring to your chart to double check the orientation before sewing. You're always putting right sides together. The only one you have to worry about is the sunny. The others are solid, so it does not matter which direction you do. When you get to bigger spots that you need to put together, you're going to want to use pins. And this is my tip for pinning. If these seams were matched up, it's even more important. But I like to pin at an angle coming down from the direction that you're sewing. So if I'm sewing this way, I have it angled this way, because then I can sew much closer before I have to take the pin out than if I pin straight across. So I'm just going to put a few pins just to make sure this doesn't shift while I'm sewing this bigger seam. And that was especially important when I wanted to make sure that the heart points matched up. I also pressed that seam open instead of to the side because there was so much bulk. There was double seams on each side. I hope you've enjoyed this quilt block. You can get the free directions from Riley Blake Designs. There is a link in the video description so that you can find that. This is the 6-inch block, And they also include directions for how to make a 12-inch block. I would recommend doing the bigger one if you are new and just trying your hand at quilting. But if you like it and you don't mind playing with teeny tiny pieces, this one is super fun too. My name is Tara Reed. I'm an artist, a fabric designer with Riley Blake Designs, and I love creating all these videos for YouTube for easy sewing projects, fabric scrap projects, beginner sewing, beginner quilting, sew and sell ideas, and more. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, click that bell so that YouTube notifies you when I post something new, and let's just have so much fun together.